your web chat. Today's Fort Hood Museum update is sponsored by Advanced Pain Care. We appreciate them very much being a community partner. And of course, we have our guest speaker, Mr. Bob Crouch, who is the Vice President of the National Mounted Warfare Museum. And we appreciate you presenting us today on all the updates. We're very excited to hear about what's going on and learning about what the future is going to hold for the Central Texas area in regards to the museum. I will let you know that we will have a Q&A afterwards, but Bob, I'm sure, will make an announcement. He is more than willing for you guys to ask those questions as he goes along. So Bob, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you right now, sir. Thank you.
All right, Gina, thank you. And thanks to everybody that's participating. You know, the folks who are online right now, I think are some individuals in the community who are probably more well read into this into our project than many others. But so some of this will be repetitious because we wanted to make sure that I covered some of the information for any people that might not know about the project at all. But we'll go through that fairly quickly. And what I really want to share with you all is our current status and give you an update towards the end. So hopefully everybody can see the screen that I've shared with you all, and this is basically our updated presentation as of this month. So our mission, as everyone knows, I believe, is to build a world-class museum here in Central Texas. Part of that mission includes planning for the museum, which is designing it and working with architects and the museum folks at the Center for Military History to develop the exhibit plan, to raise funds for the museum, and then to build the museum itself. And one of the unique things about this project is that once the building is complete, we turn it over to the Army for in perpetuity to do the operations and maintenance, the staffing, and the security for the museum. And then we stay on after that happens to continue to raise funds for to build expansions and updates to the museum, to do marketing and to do special events. Another interesting thing about our museum is kind of the scope of the storyline. Is telling the story of all the soldiers and units that have served on Fort Hood. It's telling the stories about our local communities. And it's also expanded from where it was a couple of years ago. We've been asked to expand past the start date of 1942 when Fort Hood was founded, and go back and tell more of the mounted warfare story throughout U.S. Army history. So our storyline now begins with the Revolutionary War and moves forward from there. So here's our history. We've been around a decade now. It's hard to believe that where this project started in 2011 and we've come this far. Certainly we were, no one understood the scope, I don't think, of how long these projects take. But what I will tell you is that we've managed to break ground in under 10 years on our first phase, which compared to similar projects usually takes 18 to 20 years to get to the point that we're at. So while it does seem like a decade is a long time, in the grand scheme of things, we are really ahead of the game for this project. Our master plan is $38 million. That includes the full phase 1 and then future phases for the museum, as well as the exhibits that, again, the U.S. Army will be contributing. And then the Army is allowing us to build on 17 acres of land outside of, right outside the security perimeter of Fort Hood. If we had to sell that commercially, it would estimated value would be about $10 million. So we're pretty happy about that. Our focus is, of course, training soldiers, educating the public, representing diversity and inclusion in our community and in the Army, sharing the story not just of our soldiers, but our family members and the civilian communities around us that have made Fort Hood the great place. Again, some of this I've already talked about, the partnership with the U.S. Army. Right now we're building on a 17-acre lot right outside of the Fort Hood Visitors Center, and I will show you an image of that in just a moment so you know where it's at. If you're in the area and you've driven past the front gate of Fort Hood, you've probably seen some skeletal structure going up, and that is the first phase of the museum, and I'll show you some pictures of that in just a minute. One of the advantages, big advantages, is that it's outside of the security perimeter. So therefore, we will, right now, there are two museums on post, the 1st Cavalry Division Museum and the 3rd Cavalry Regiment Museum, are pretty much limited to those who have some connection to the military, because you have to generally have an ID card to get on post. You can get a pass if you're not tied to the military, but if you're coming to visit a museum and you don't know how to do that, you're just not going to come visit a museum, because it's kind of daunting. So having this museum outside the security perimeter will allow visitors from around the area, across the state and across the nation, to come visit. I mentioned that the Center for Military History, which will be responsible for this and is responsible for all Army museums, is contributing about $5 million over the course of the project to design, fabricate, and install all of the exhibits for the project. Early on, there were some thoughts that, as we were working on this museum project, that there would be some conflicts with the other Army museums, and particularly the National Army Museum, which opened up last year. But the reality is that the Army, the Center for Military History, sees the National Mountain Warrior Museum as an extension, a west of the Mississippi extension of the National Museum. And so they have been incredibly supportive and helpful in making sure that this museum gets everything it needs from their side to make it happen. As it shows, I've mentioned we do have two museums on post. One, the 1st Cavalry Division Museum, has been representing that unit since the very early 70s. The other museum has transitioned over time from the 2nd Armored Division Museum to the 4th Infantry Museum, and now the 3rd Cavalry Regiment Museum. Those two museums will close, and their staff and their artifacts will be transitioned over into the National Mounted Warrior Museum. What's significant about that, for those that are concerned about losing those individual museums, is in phase 1 alone, we're going to have more than double the space that those two museums have combined to tell the story. And once we build an expansion to the exhibit space, we'll have more than 4 times of the space available. But we're going to be able to tell more of the stories of 1st Cav and 3rd Cav than we currently represented in either of the museums. So that's really a big plus. And again, I mentioned once the Army takes over the building, then they'll be responsible for operating it, maintaining it, the utilities, so on and so forth. Location, very briefly, for those that are familiar, which I hope everybody on this call is familiar with, the main gate of Fort Hood. The building on the left you see is the Visitor Center. Off to the right, you see the Horse Cavalry Detachment, and the building in yellow is the footprint for the National Mounted Warrior Museum. And as you can see, we're located right off a Trooper Loop, which leads back to the Horse Cav Detachment. And off the screen to the north is the main gate for Fort Hood. Again, showing how easy it will be for a visitor to simply come on TJ Mills Boulevard, pull in as if they're going to the Visitor Center, come to the museum, and then head right back off post without having to get a pass. Give you some pictures. Usually I show videos, some videos of the museum to give you an idea what it feels like. Due to some concerns people may have with their personal bandwidth for Zoom and lag time, I just opted to show you some pictures. So this is what we envision the museum looking out at full build out. I'm going to talk through the phases in just a moment, but you can see this is not like anything in our area. It's certainly not like just about any Army museum, and it's just going to be a grand place to be able to showcase Fort Hood in Central Texas. Here's the main entry plaza leading up to this. We will do some additions to this plaza over time to include some walls that demonstrate the various patches of the units that have served here. One thing you may be interested in is we do have a commemorative brick program that we've been operating since 2014, where you can buy a 4x8 or a 8x8 brick to commemorate a friend, loved one. Doesn't have to have been in service. But this entry plaza, we're tentatively calling Valor Plaza, will be where those bricks are in place. And as you can see, it's a real nice lead up into the front of the museum. On the back side, in a later phase, we will be building this grand amphitheater on the backside of the museum, which will be facing towards the Horse Cavalry Detachment. In phase one, we have a smaller edition of this, but we plan to get to something built out here where we can have concerts and changes of command, and an opportunity to watch the 4th of July fireworks. Just a real nice gathering place for people. Give you some images from the inside of the museum. On your upper left, you see envisioning of what the main atrium, the rotunda, will look like. I can tell you a couple changes since we had this rendering developed. That OH-6 helicopter will still be suspended from the ceiling, and will be marked with the combat markings of Alpha Troop 1st and 9th Cavalry from Vietnam. Many of you who've heard about our project before knew that we had talked about having that image of the globe in the atrium, and would have different things that would be associated with that. What the Center for Military History has opted to do, instead of us placing that in the floor, is to put a nice circular display in that area that's going to represent the past, the present, and the future of mounted warfare. And they're going to do that by representing the past through a replica of a cavalryman on horseback to indicate our origins. Then we are actually going to have a Renault FT1 French tank from World War I that will represent the mechanization of our mounted warriors. And then the other piece that they're still working on is how they want to represent the future. And up until now, whether it's the horse, whether it's the tank, whether it's the helicopter above, we've all talked about platforms that soldiers have ridden on. Well, in the future, as many of you all know, we're relying a lot on unmanned equipment, and so perhaps that third piece for the exhibit on the ground floor there, on the floor there, will be representing a soldier as a platform for an unmanned aerial vehicle or something like that. But they're still working through that piece. On the bottom right is our vision for our classroom space that we want to put in the museum. This will also be in a future phase, and that represents, as you'll see in a few moments, 4 different classrooms that we can open up into one big classroom into the atrium. So we can host small classes or reunions or whatever, or we can open it all the way up into the rotunda and be able to use all that space. Just some ideas of some what might be represented. Of course, many of you have been to the museums on Fort Hood, and you know that we have a wide history to share here. Of course, unlike the museums right now, we will have what we call macro artifacts, or think big pieces of equipment inside the museum. The M1 will not be in the museum due to its size and weight. It'll be out front. But we'll have, right now, I think they have planned 10 to 12 pieces of equipment representing the evolution of mechanized forces in the U.S. Army. Also, of course, you can't help but talk about people like Elvis Presley and Jackie Robinson and Ovita Kulpabi in our museum, and this is just an envisioning of what we could potentially share about the Elvis Presley story. To walk you through the museum footprint very, very quickly, this represents the entire footprint, all phases. Right now, we are working on phase 1, which is everything in the dark blue that you see on this diagram. Basically, it's everything we need to have in place to open the doors for guests, because as it was said in famously, if you build it, they will come. We know we wanted to get started so that we could start getting more exposure for the museum project regionally, locally, regionally, and nationally. So the parking lot, the entry plaza, the rotunda, the temporary exhibit hall that's about 1,200 square feet, 13,000 square feet of permanent exhibit space, which is represented on the back side, on the bottom of the screen in the dark blue kind of semicircle. And then the mechanical equipment and space to represent, to support the entire footprint, not just phase 1. And while I'll share with you that each of these phases is listed with a number by it, that does not necessarily mean that is the phase that we will try to move to next. A lot of that is dependent upon requirements for the museum, and also what donors are willing to contribute for, major donors are willing to contribute for. But we do plan on expanding, as I mentioned earlier, the permanent exhibit space by another 11,000 square feet. That's represented in the light blue. The 4 classrooms that I mentioned are on, we'll just go counterclockwise. The amphitheater that I mentioned is that greenish color. The 4 classrooms are represented in the yellows. And as you can see, there'll be, each of those classrooms is over 1,000 square feet. So it'll provide not just the museum, but the 3 Corps and Fort Hood commander the opportunity to have a large classroom space to train his soldiers. We'll also have a gift shop and offices for the foundation staff, and finally offices for the museum staff. So here's our partners in this project. We do have many more, but I wanted to focus specifically on the 3 that are in the partnered for the construction and exhibitry. Huckabee is our architect, Huckabee Incorporated. They're out of Dallas, Austin, and other areas in the state, and you may be familiar with them in the Clean area, because particularly in the Clean Temple MSA, the vast majority of the schools that have been recently built have been designed by Huckabee. And on the right-hand side, Bartlett Koch is a construction company out of Austin that is partnered with Huckabee on many of these schools. The replacement for the old East Ward in downtown Killeen is a partnership between these 2 organizations. And then, as I mentioned, in the middle of this chart, you get the Center of Military History. Again, they're our partner for all the exhibitry, and really have been the regulatory body that we've worked with to work through the regulations and requirements that the Army has placed upon this project. Our board of directors, I'm sure that most everyone on this list is familiar to you, as I think all of you know. My boss and the president and CEO of our project is Lieutenant General retired Butch Funk. And I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it's been to work with him for the last 10 years, because he really, when times are hard, he's a calming force. But there's so many folks on this list that you're familiar with, and they've been very good to us as a board in terms of both the governance and the fundraising aspect that we've been working for the last decade. Where we are today, the museum project as a joint project between public-private partnership. Let me back up a minute. So it's been a long time since the Army has been allowed by law and by regulation to build their own museums. So in order to build a museum, it's got to be a partnership between a private organization, a foundation or association, and the public organization, which is the Army. And so that's how our relationship is set up. In doing so, we had to meet a series of gates in our project, and then present that project to the Secretary of the Army for approval. And then it had to go through a congressional waiting period of 2 weeks, at which point it went back to the Secretary of the Army to give us that permission. I'm pleased to announce that did happen last spring. Over the course of, it took us about 9 months to get approval, but we received both approval from Congress and the Secretary of the Army. Many of you, I know from looking at who's on this call, were at our groundbreaking ceremony on the 19th of November. What a great day that was for us. And I think that the feedback I've gotten from most members of the community, that it was just a great ceremony and built a lot of excitement for this project. Phase 1 construction is underway. It actually preceded the groundbreaking ceremony by a couple of weeks. And it looks like right now we'll have substantial completion of the building itself in mid-October of this year. Our grand opening is projected, as you see, for late 2022. And you might say, well, how come, if the building's done at the end of 21 but the grand opening is not going to be in 2020 until the end of 2022? What are you going to do in that time period? Well, let me explain that real quickly. So because the Army is responsible for paying for the exhibitry, they operate on a fiscal year and a budgeting process. And a certain amount of the funds that they have budgeted for this project came available in this fiscal year in October. And those funds will go towards contracting a museum exhibit designer to take the exhibit plan and storyline and to say, okay, here's what you want to have in the museum, and here's how we think we can best represent it. So this year will be spent by the museum exhibit designer creating that design plan for the museum. Next fiscal year, starting in October of this year, is more money is released or budgeted that will pay for the fabrication and installation of the museums. So at the end of this year, the museum designer will turn that plan over to a museum exhibit construction firm who will then construct all the exhibits and then over time install them in the museum. Now, does that mean that we're going to leave the building empty for a year? It doesn't. That would be a shame and a waste. And so we're working with the Center for Military History and the local museum team to figure out exactly what we can do before the permanent exhibits are installed. So we may, we'll likely put some of the macro artifacts in, we'll develop some temporary exhibits, and then we'll also use the facility for some events that are going on. So that's what we plan on doing in the interim until we're able to do a grand opening. So we will probably do a soft opening late 21, very early 22. And I really wanted to highlight this on red on the bottom of the chart because I realized that this Chamber of Commerce, one of the main reasons for existence is economic development and tourism in Harker Heights and in the Clean Temple MSA. What I want to share with you is that our master planner, who developed this plan back in 2011, projected that we would have a minimum of 265,000 visitors in the first year, with almost 200,000 coming out from outside of the MSA. That's a pretty significant deal. That's a lot of people. I think we did the math at one point. If you break that out over a 365-day period, that's roughly 504 people per day coming to the clean area, the greater clean area, to visit this museum. So along with that, they bring money. If they're coming from outside the area across the state and across the nation, they're going to have a place to stay. They're going to buy food. They're going to go to restaurants. They're going to go to gas stations. They may come here and realize that this really is the great place and start looking for real estate. So this project is going to be very significant for our area. You see a number of $5 million of economic impact on there. That is based off of a national average that says that the average museum goer spends $25 per visit to a museum. So I think we know that economic impact is probably going to be much greater. And the other thing I'd like to share about this is we currently have Texas A&M Central Texas's UCare program revising and relooking at the economic impact for us because we think these numbers, basing on an average, is going to be low, but we think these numbers are probably lower than they were in projected in 2011 for a couple of reasons. One, our communities have all grown in size. Two, the educational facilities have grown significantly, both at the in our primary and secondary schools and at Central Texas College, A&M Central Texas, Mary Hardin Baylor, Temple College. So we just think there are a lot of factors that went into their initial calculations of visitorship and economic impact that we think have increased in our favor. And so we're looking forward to receiving that new economic impact statement from them so we can update our numbers. And I'll be sure to get back with this group when we have that information. Give you some updates on construction. We've achieved our first construction milestone, which is the primary foundation that was finished almost a month ago. It's hard to believe. Structural top out happens when they basically have the roof on. That's currently scheduled for the end of March. Dry-in is in June, and that's when they basically have the place closed up and so that the weather can't get in anymore. Permanent power is when they turn on the permanent power, and the substantial completion is the point at which the construction company can turn it over for us to start looking at a punch list in conjunction with the Department of Public Works on Fort Hood to make sure that there are no issues with the building. And let me throw this out there because I haven't said it yet. We probably ought to put this on that chart that shows our prime partners for construction. But I have to tell you that Mr. Brian Dosa and the crew over at the Department of Public Works on Fort Hood have been absolutely nothing but phenomenal. They want this museum as bad as anybody else, and they have really been so supportive and helpful. We're very thankful to them. for that. Our construction progress highlights for you. Again, some of this is even outdated now. We spent about the last week to 10 days without any construction going on site because of the weather. But most of this is complete, and we're continuing to work on the structural steel and the insulating concrete forms. So let me show you some pictures. And if you've not been by there recently, you can feel free to go out there and take a look. If you would like the opportunity to come walk the ground, let me know. And please, you can pass those requests through Gina and Mary. I'd prefer to limit the amount of time that we're out getting in the way of the construction team. But so I'd prefer to take small groups of 3 to 5 people out there to walk the ground. But please, if you're interested in coming out and seeing progress in person, let Gina and Mary know, and we'll orchestrate that so we can get you out there. So what you're seeing here was the pour of the foundation from back in January, some of the trenching for some of the water lines. And then what I think is really cool in this montage is, if you look in the top center, this is 2 weeks ago when the museum, when the infrastructure, the superstructure of the atrium started to go up in some of the walls. And I don't think I have a more current picture we'll see in just a moment, but they've pretty much completed the steel erection for the atrium and most of the walls for what will be the mechanical area, and then they'll start working on the back wall of the building where the exhibit space is. There you go. There's some pictures. Upper left hand shows you, that's a front view from the rotunda. On the upper right, those are what you see there is the structure for 2 16-foot garage doors, which will allow us to move big equipment in and out without much problem. And then you can see, interesting, bottom left and bottom right. That's bottom left is one of the walls going in. It's an interesting structure. It's not concrete block. It's what's called ICF, or insulated concrete forms. Think of, it's made out of styrofoam, which sounds silly, but it's got some plastic supports in it that they open it up like a Lego brick, and they put the rebar in there, and then they fill that with concrete, which actually gives greater support and greater insulation than concrete blocks. So I have no further information for you today. You all, I'm just very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to this group. Everyone on here has been so supportive of us over the last decade as we've tried to move forward. But now I'm happy to open the floor to any questions that you may have, and if I can answer them, I'll answer them. If not, I will get back to you.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. I mean, this is exciting. I know that we've all been working and waiting very patiently to see that groundbreaking, and you're absolutely right. It was an honor for all of us to be out there that day and be a part of it. And thank you guys countlessly for working so hard to bring this vision to fruition. I would like to start with just a couple of questions, and then we'll turn it over to everyone. Bob, you talked about the classrooms, which I think are phenomenal, but can you kind of highlight a little bit more about the museum partnership with our local ISDs, what that's going to look like, and how will this museum support the education industry?
Absolutely, be happy to do that. Well, one of the so the main mission of an Army museum, from the Army's perspective, is to train soldiers, to train them on their legacy, on their history, and we see training as the same thing as education, but education we see is for the public. And so what we see at this museum being able to do, and I was just working on something the other day, we started early on, and we kind of need to pick it back up, but early on in the first couple of years of the project, in developing the very rough stages of the storyline, we worked with both the curriculum development team from both KISD and CCISD on making sure that the storyline touched on areas that were relevant to what needs to be taught in school. And as we have transitioned from making this a vision to now we're under construction and reality, we'll re-engage with them to make sure that the exhibit plan has all those touch points, because we want to be able to use this facility for many things. First off, for primary and secondary education, we've got well over 100 schools in that category within 60 miles of this museum. And for many years, a lot of those schools, because of budget cuts, haven't been able to take field trips. We're going to provide them a place to come and not just learn skills, but to see what it's like to be a soldier, to see what it's like to be a family member. Um, the skills. People say, well, how are you going to teach STEM skills in an Army museum? Well, if you've ever been around somebody shooting an artillery piece, you have to understand a whole bunch of science and math to be able to get that round to land in the right place. And so there are ways. That's just one example of how we can teach STEM skills. We, of course, are going to focus on teaching leadership skills, education skills, and things like loyalty and honor and selfless service. But the other big piece that we think we can do a good job of teaching in this museum, or providing opportunities to learn, is probably a better way of saying it, is diversity and inclusion. The Army has led the way, led society in for decades in how to deal with diversity and inclusion. And our area, for those that don't know, Jackie Robinson was assigned here during World War II, was court-martialed for something he shouldn't have been court-martialed for, was acquitted, and later went on to do great things for Major League Baseball. But the thing is that kind of started the desegregation of the Army, the integration of the Army, that happened in the late 40s, long before it happened in our society. We had Uvita Kalpabi, who was a Killeen native, was appointed to be the first commander of the Women's Army Corps, which stood up here at Fort Hood. Our units that served here during World War II, or during World War II, our units that currently are formally served here, worked with Navajo code talkers. If you think about how much diversity and inclusion we have supported here at Fort Hood, that's something that we need to be able to share. And so, I talked about our primary and secondary schools, but, we also have, like I mentioned earlier, we've got our great colleges and universities in the areas, and we really want to become a focal point for research into some of the areas that we've talked about. Now, you might notice, we do not have space in the museum as currently planned for physical archives, although we will have some physical archives located on post still, but we hope to be able to create a network of virtual archives where we tie into CTC and A&M Central Texas and Baylor and University of North Texas and others to be able to create that. So the second piece to that's kind of where we're headed in terms of exhibitry, but our programs that we'll develop that will be a partnership between the foundation, the Center for Military History, and our local educators is really where we figure that out. We'll figure out, what kind of curriculum project or platform could we create that we could export to KISD and CCISD to use for their classes. And we've got to be sensitive to the fact that, quite frankly, we're portraying combat, and you've got to be careful how you portray that if you want kindergartners to get to learn something out of it the same way that you want a teenager or a college student to learn out of it. So that's a consideration that we have.
Well, I think those are all wonderful opportunities, and thank you for sharing. And I think it's wonderful for the community to be educated on what you're talking about today. And one of the other pieces that I want to kind of circle back around and talk about is, as a certified tourism executive, I'm fully aware of the economic impact that the tourism industry brings to our economy. But I think it's extremely important to share some of those facts about not just what you mentioned, resulting in the $5 million annually, which is huge for Central Texas, But the state of Texas in 2019 had an $83 billion travel spending, which resulted in 169 billion. So if you take that translation, Bob, into what you mentioned earlier, it's a huge impact for Central Texas. I mean, that really changes our quality of life, not only what the museum brings, but that economic impact to our local citizens, business community. So I would love for you just to kind of talk about that one more time, because we're going to be sharing this with a community that is also brand new. It doesn't realize the impact that it has, not just on Killeen and Fort Hood, but the region.
Sure. Did you want me to share the numbers again, or just my
Yes,
thoughts on it?
I do. I think
Okay.
they're incredibly important.
So think of this, folks: 265,000 visitors per year, minimum, with 200,000 minimum coming from outside the Killeen Temple MSA, and those are people coming from regionally, from across the state and across the country. That's roughly 504 people a day to visit the museum that are going to need a place to stay. They're going to need a place to eat. They're going to need to buy groceries. They're going to need to buy gas. They may even come and say, hey, I want to live here. So they may need real estate. So from a tourism perspective, we don't have a destination activity in Central Texas. And so many people have different definitions of Central Texas, but I think we all understand what ours is. We have nothing right now to really, unless you have business at Fort Hood. A lot of folks will never venture west of I-35. This museum will give them a reason to venture west of I-35. And to expand on the tourism piece, why that's important, we've already begun. How many, this is a hypothetical question, but how many of you out there enjoy going on one of the many tourism trails that Texas has to offer, whether that's the Wine Trail or the Forts Trail, or I don't know, there's so many of them out there. The Bluebonnet Trail. We've already been talking for several years with the Texas Historical Commission about creating a military museums trail here in the state of Texas that would link our museum with the Camp Mabry Museum down in Austin, with the Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, with the Museum of the Frontier up in Abilene, because tourists from across the country look for things like this, like the Bourbon Trail. That's nationally known. People say, hey, I want to go do the Bourbon Trail. Well, we want to make this an opportunity for people to say, hey, I want to go do the Military Museums Trail, and I'm going to come from across the country to come to Killeen, Harker Heights, Coppers Cove, Temple, Texas, to come see this museum and then see what the area has to offer. People travel right now. I think one of the most popular museums in our country outside of the Smithsonian is probably the National World War II Museum. And if you've not been there, I'd encourage you to go, because it is phenomenal. Again, that is all privately funded and has some very high-end donors who founded it, named Spielberg and Hanks. We hope to achieve their level of greatness at some point, but they attract people from all ages, from all across the country and around the world. And really, our commitment is to try and make this museum something that does the same thing for this area. So it is a very big deal.
I have a question for you, Bob. I'm sure you worked the metrics into your numbers, and that would be all of the reunions that would be taking place with all the units coming in here and then visiting that center. You mentioned Jackie Robinson and Ed. You and I go back a long way. So as a kid growing up in the Army, born in the Army, I can remember wherever we were stationed, there were basketball teams, football teams, baseball teams. Fort Hood had them. I was a bat boy out there before they tore the stadium down a couple of years ago. I wasn't a bat boy recently, but I was there. We had professional baseball players. Harmon Killebrew was my baseball coach. So we had there were lots of all the professional athletes who came into the service during those years, served for 2 years in what they called special services. And they put them into the gyms to run the gymnasium for basketball. And so we played different teams. We had a football stadium out there by the railhead, and we had, so I can remember all of those professional athletes coming in and spending 2 years. They played ball. That was our commitment, and did some other things. Then got back out and went back into playing. So, I mean, those would be some guys you could reach out to who might really want to contribute. But
Well,
and
absolutely.
I have a question. Ed and I have a question. When did the Army decide to put metrics into the artillery pieces? We thought it was point and shoot.
Oh, come on. You all know it's much more complicated than that.
Well,
Not in our day.
I just remember those cavalry sabers we had to carry in the
Yeah, trying to get it in and out of your tank, Ed, with a cavalry saber was very difficult, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough.
But,
I just wanted to say, Bob, thank you for this decade, really, of hard work that you've put in on this. This would not have come to fruition without you. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Ed. And I appreciate it. And I would like to share with everyone that, we do have, I won't call you out by name. We do have a number of our donors on this call. There are two. Ted is not on here any longer. He is one of our board members, and I would be I would be very remiss if I didn't say a huge thank you to Miss Jean Shine, as our CASA has really been was the hammer for us up working with the Secretary of the Army and making sure that they didn't let this fall through the cracks. So Jean, thank you very much for that. Jim, in answer to your question, you're exactly right. We've had a number of particularly recently, a number of sports stars come out of this area. Robert Griffin III, particularly here in Coppers Cove, and many others. And if anybody here has any connection with any of those sports folks, please share them, because we'd love to get them interested in the project and be willing to do that. And I would be remiss, this, I don't know if the rules of this, if it's like a Rotary meeting or a Lions meeting, but we still are. I'll be broad and generic. We're still fundraising. We have some things we still want to do in phase, as part of phase one, that we haven't been able to fund yet. And of course, you saw all the other phases that we want to build, because I think our job isn't done until we build the whole thing. I don't want to quit at phase one. I would ask, if folks that would be interested in contributing, please let me know. Particularly if you have connections to giving foundations that might be interested, please be willing to. All I'd ask, I'm not going to ask you to ask anybody for anything. I just ask you to make a connection for us and open the door for us. And that would be just very helpful. And I guess the third ask I would have for you is help spread the word. We've been around a decade, but if you were to go to the average citizen who doesn't participate in forums like this, who doesn't pay attention to what's going on around them, regardless of what city it's in this community, and say, hey, do you know about the Mounted Warrior Museum? You're probably going to get a blank look. So you all can be our biggest prophets. You all can be the ones that go out and tell the community, hey, you've got something really special coming here that you're going to be able to take your kids to. It's going to be an educational opportunity. So please, whether that's by word of mouth through you and your businesses or your organizations, or whether that's if you'd like to partner with helping us get the word out, until I call it the coconut telegraph. We've had things on. We've had broadcast PSAs on radio and TV. We've been on Facebook ads. We've done peer-to-peer fundraising, but this is still remains a small Texas town. And like Jimmy Buffett says, it's all word of mouth. It's the coconut telegraph that people really rely on. So if you all would please help to spread the word, and if anybody wants to know more, certainly have them reach out to me, and I'll speak to groups. I've spoken to. The smallest group I've spoken to, I think, is 5 people at the Florence American Legion, up to, and that was a banner day because they only had 6 people in the organization, and upwards of 400 plus people. So help me spread the word and give me opportunities to share with others.
Is your brick purchase information on the website? Where do you?
Yes, sir, it is. If you go to our website, which is and which is N as in November, M as in Mike, W as in whiskey. So nmwfoundation.org, and you scroll right down about halfway through the main page. There's the information for purchasing commemorative brick. Yes, sir.
I think we had a chat from Mr. Ken Cates. Ken, would you like to ask your question or?
So Bob, we've got, timing is essential. Our Fort Hood area Habitat for Humanity has become a focal for Habitat International, including Habitat Texas. Every year they have other than COVID year, obviously, they host a convention for all Habitat affiliates. It's usually 3 to 4 days, and we actually bring in other affiliates from Florida, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and New Mexico as well. So I say all that because they're looking for a host site, and we've been talk of the state for several years to have the MSA Kit Plain Temple area, because we cover Bell, Coriel, and Passes
Yeah.
for one of the ones 2022, 2023 timeframe. We're not asking for the museum to be the 4-day host site, but we really we're trying to highlight every event we go to, they want to impact the community. One of those being the kickoff, having a place where it's a museum or the zoo like in Waco a couple of years ago, but it's for about a 4-hour window. It's closed just for Habitat affiliates or their partners and families. Awesome, thumbs up's all I need.
You tell me when it's on.
All right.
We'll
It's usually August, September timeframe every year. So we'll definitely.
So you'd be
connect.
looking 22 or 23, somewhere in there?
Correct.
Ken, we'll make it happen. That's exactly the kind of thing we want to be able to do in terms of special events. Unfortunately, we won't have we won't be 100% in time for the 100th, the reunion, the 1st Cavalry Division reunion next year that celebrates the 100th anniversary of the Cav. But we will make, just like you say, we're going to figure out a way that we can bring groups over to see the museum in the condition it's in then. Which, it'll be, most of the inside will be done. I think at that point we'll be working on landscaping. But you're exactly right. That's exactly what we want to do. We want to bring people here because how do we best tell the story of our area, and especially with some of the things we've gone through that not outside of COVID, and this area in Fort Hood in particular has had to deal with over the last 9 months. This is a great place. There's a reason that we live here. There's a reason that, and I don't know if these stats are accurate any longer. Gina or Mary may have to share this, but when we looked into this a couple of years ago, there's a reason that 65% of the soldiers that leave the Army out of Fort Hood stay in the Clean Temple MSA. It's because it's a great place, and we get some bad news every now and then that doesn't shed us in a good light, but the people that live here know the reason that we live here, and we need to share that with the world. And we really hope that this museum will be a gem that will help to do that, to really take us to that next level as a community.
An additional metric on there, Bob, is a few years back at CTC, 3 Corps also shared, Human Resource Sergeant Major, shared that upwards of 28% of all DOD from other outlying bases relocate to Central Texas also.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's a pretty big deal.
Numbers are increasing, so.
Well, people ask, well, why are you building this museum here? Well, quite frankly, the National Museum is a beautiful facility, but where are the soldiers? There's no soldiers in and around, not really in and around, not the privates and not specialists and sergeants and second lieutenants. They're out here. The combat soldiers are out here. And we don't have the highest number of retirees in the country, but one of the highest concentrations of Army retirees is on the I-35 corridor between Dallas Fort Worth and San Antonio. 25%, well, not so much anymore. 10% of the active force roughly is here on Fort Hood. 25% of the active Army is in the state of Texas. And if you look at that doesn't include the Texas Guard and Reserve. And if you figure roughly 95, 98% of every of every reserve and guard unit that deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom to Afghanistan since 2001 has come through North Fort Hood for training. So I mean, we're important as a post to the defense of our country. We're important as a community to be that support for the post that is taking care of all those people, and we need to let the world know that.
Well, we love our soldiers, and Bob, thank you for working so hard again on this project. I mean, without you guys having the vision and boots on the ground, we would not be where we are today. We're going to have to probably wrap things up. Does anybody else have any more questions? We do have room for another question or comment. No? All right, Bob, great information. Again, always thank you for the wonderful update, highlighting again the economic impact and just the fact that you're going to be telling the stories of our soldiers, which I think is wonderful. We will share this update on our Facebook page, and we will also make sure to put up the link to your website to if somebody wants to make a donation or if you want to purchase that brick that Bob talked about, their brick program. I appreciate every one of you taking the time out to be a part of this today, and enjoy the Texas sunshine. God bless Texas. Have a wonderful day, guys.